Before mountains carried names or seas reflected the sky, existence was neither empty nor complete, but suspended in a boundless state where nothing possessed form or purpose. Everything that would one day become the world already existed in silence, waiting for a force capable of separating order from endless confusion. But how could life emerge when even time itself seemed trapped inside the void? From that immeasurable abyss, a presence unlike any other slowly awakened, not as a conqueror carrying weapons, but as the very foundation upon which all things would stand. She was Gaia, the living earth, and with her appearance the first true shape entered creation, giving the universe a place where existence could finally begin. Yet every beginning carries the seed of another story, and Gaia's destiny was far greater than simply becoming the ground beneath all living things. Alone, she brought forth powers that represented the deepest forces of creation itself, each one embodying a different aspect of the newborn cosmos. Seas, mountains, and finally the endless heavens emerged through her, until the vast sky itself became the mighty being known as Uranus, whose immense presence stretched above everything that now existed. Their union would transform the fragile balance of creation forever, but it would also awaken the first fear that no god, however powerful, could ever truly escape. The first union of heaven and earth did not simply create a family of divine beings. It gave birth to powers so immense that even their own father struggled to accept what stood before him. One after another, extraordinary children emerged, each carrying a strength that seemed destined to reshape the future, and instead of feeling pride, Uranus saw only the shadow of his own downfall. What happens when the ruler of the universe begins to fear the very blood that carries his legacy? Determined to preserve his supremacy, Uranus chose domination over compassion and cast many of his children into the deepest prison hidden beneath the world. Confined within that endless darkness, the imprisoned beings pounded against their eternal cage, and every violent blow echoed through Gaia herself, whose suffering grew heavier with every passing age. A mother's grief was becoming more dangerous than any army, though her husband failed to understand the force he was awakening. Unable to endure the torment any longer, Gaia secretly searched among her children for one willing to challenge the ruler of the heavens and break the tyranny that had consumed their family. Most lowered their heads in fear, but one remained standing, driven by ambition powerful enough to overcome hesitation, and that titan was Cronus. From that moment forward, the balance of creation began to shift, because the greatest battles are often born long before the first weapon is ever raised. Cronus accepted his mother's request without hesitation, and Gaia placed into his hands a weapon unlike any the world had ever seen, a blade forged not only to wound, but to end an age. Hidden beneath the cover of night, he waited in silence for the moment when Uranus would descend once more to embrace the earth, never suspecting that betrayal was already waiting in the darkness. The fate of the heavens now rested on a single strike. When the opportunity arrived, Cronus emerged from his hiding place and swung the great sickle with ruthless precision, striking the ruler of the sky before he could defend himself. The cry of Uranus echoed across creation, while his blood scattered over the world and gave rise to new divine beings, proving that even violence could become the source of unexpected life. Yet victory always carries a price that few recognize until it is far too late. The Titans celebrated the fall of the old king, and Cronus was hailed as the new sovereign of the cosmos after freeing many of his imprisoned brothers and sisters from their long captivity. But even as triumph surrounded him, a warning lingered over his newly claimed throne, for the same cycle that had destroyed Uranus had not truly come to an end. Could the conqueror who overthrew his own father ever hope to escape the destiny that had already claimed every ruler before him? The new ruler stood above every other titan, commanding the universe with unquestioned authority, yet peace never settled within his heart. The final words of the fallen Uranus followed him like an invisible shadow, warning that one day his own child would rise against him exactly as he had risen against his father. How long can absolute power survive when fear begins to rule the one who possesses it? Time passed, and Cronus took the Titaness Rhea as his queen, bringing a brief illusion of stability to the heavens. But when their first child was born, the prophecy returned with overwhelming force, and instead of seeing an innocent daughter resting in his hands, he imagined the future sovereign who would one day strip him of everything he had fought to obtain. In that terrible instant, terror proved stronger than love. Driven by desperation rather than reason, Cronus swallowed the newborn whole, believing that no child hidden within his own body could ever challenge his throne. The same horror unfolded again and again as each new son and daughter entered the world, leaving Rhea powerless while the ruler of creation transformed into the very tyrant he had once sworn to overthrow. Yet destiny is never defeated by cruelty alone, and with every child that disappeared, the moment of reckoning drew closer. Rhea's sorrow deepened with every child she lost, but despair slowly gave way to resolve as she realized that pleading with Cronus would never soften his heart. When she discovered she was expecting another child, she quietly withdrew to a secluded refuge where the cries of a newborn could not reach the ears of the king, determined that this time fate would unfold differently. Could one mother's courage succeed where every prophecy and every warning had failed? There, far from the throne of the Titans, she gave birth to a son whose arrival carried an almost indescribable sense of purpose, as though the universe itself had been waiting for this single moment. Leaving the infant under the protection of loyal guardians, Rhea wrapped an ordinary stone in swaddling cloth and returned to her husband with the deception hidden in her trembling hands. The gamble was extraordinary, for the future of heaven depended upon whether Cronus would notice the difference. Blinded by fear and convinced that he had once again outwitted destiny, Cronus swallowed the disguised stone without a moment of suspicion, while Rhea concealed both her grief and her hope behind silent tears. Safe beyond the king's reach, the child who had escaped his father's cruelty began to grow in secrecy, unaware that one day his name would become known across the heavens and the earth alike. That hidden child was Zeus, and with every passing year, the downfall of the Titans moved one step closer. Zeus did not grow up within the luxury of a royal palace or beneath the protection of an empire, but among hidden sanctuaries where every passing day brought him closer to the destiny others had sacrificed everything to preserve. While loyal guardians concealed his existence from the eyes of Cronus, the young god matured with astonishing speed, his strength expanding alongside an unshakable determination that seemed woven into his very being. Yet no matter how powerful he became, one truth could never be ignored. His brothers and sisters remained imprisoned inside the very tyrant he was born to defeat. As the years passed, Zeus learned the story of the family he had never known, discovering how fear had transformed his father into a ruler consumed by suspicion and cruelty. Every revelation sharpened his resolve, but confronting the king of the Titans through brute force alone would almost certainly end in failure, for Cronus still commanded the greatest power in existence. If destiny truly intended for the old order to fall, then the first blow would need to come from wisdom rather than strength. At the decisive moment, an unexpected ally appeared carrying the means to challenge the seemingly invincible sovereign without drawing a sword. Hidden behind an innocent gift was a carefully prepared draft capable of forcing Cronus to surrender what he had guarded for countless years, and Zeus understood that this single act could change the fate of the entire universe. The age of secrecy was ending, and the first move in the greatest divine war ever remembered was finally about to begin. Disguised as a humble servant, Zeus entered the stronghold of the Titans with remarkable patience, hiding his true identity behind calm words and unwavering confidence. When the opportunity finally arrived, he offered the mysterious drink to Cronus as though it were nothing more than a rare gift worthy of the ruler of the cosmos, and the Titan accepted it without the slightest suspicion. How could the most powerful being in existence fail to recognize that his greatest threat was standing only a few steps away? Moments after swallowing the potion, an unbearable force overwhelmed Cronus from within, breaking the certainty that had protected him for so many years. One after another, the divine children he had imprisoned returned to the light, emerging fully grown and carrying the same desire that had silently matured inside their brother. The end of the tyrant who had stolen their lives before they had even begun. Even the stone that had once deceived him fell back into the world, a silent reminder that destiny had never abandoned its course. For the first time since the reign of the Titans had begun, Zeus stood beside his liberated brothers and sisters, no longer a hidden child, but the leader of a new generation prepared to challenge the old order. They withdrew to the highest mountain they could claim as their refuge, knowing that the struggle ahead would decide not only who ruled the heavens, but what kind of world would emerge from the ashes of the coming war. The age of rebellion had ended, and the greatest conflict the gods would ever witness was about to consume the universe. From their newly claimed sanctuary high above the world, Zeus and the young gods prepared for a struggle unlike anything creation had ever witnessed. Across the distant lands ruled by the Titans, Cronus gathered every loyal ally still willing to defend his throne, and before long 2 generations of divine beings stood ready to settle a conflict that words could no longer contain. Would the ancient rulers preserve their dominion, or had the age of the Olympians already begun? The first clashes shook the foundations of the earth as colossal forces met across the open plains, where mountains echoed with the impact of immortal armies. The Titans relied upon overwhelming physical might and generations of experience, forcing the younger gods to yield ground despite their determination, while every battle seemed to confirm that defeating Cronus would demand far more than courage alone. With each passing confrontation, Zeus realized that victory would remain impossible unless the balance of power itself could somehow be changed. Searching for an answer beyond conventional warfare, Zeus descended once again into the deepest prison beneath the earth, where forgotten beings still endured the punishment imposed long before his birth. There he released the master craftsmen known as the Cyclopes, whose gratitude would soon reshape the course of the war in ways neither the Titans nor the Olympians could yet imagine. The greatest weapons in mythology were about to be forged, and with them the destiny of the universe would enter its final and most dangerous chapter. The Cyclopes set aside their years of imprisonment and poured their unmatched skill into crafting weapons worthy of the coming age. From their blazing forges emerged gifts unlike any the cosmos had ever seen. Zeus received the thunderbolt that could split the heavens, Poseidon claimed the mighty trident that commanded the seas, and Hades was entrusted with a helm capable of concealing its wearer from every eye. Armed with these divine creations, the younger gods returned to the battlefield with a confidence they had never possessed before. The war entered an even more violent phase as thunder crashed across the skies, and the earth trembled beneath every exchange of unimaginable power. Zeus unleashed storms that shattered the mountainsides, while Poseidon sent waves crashing across the land and Hades struck unseen from the shadows. Yet the Titans refused to surrender, answering every assault with relentless fury. Even after years of devastating conflict, neither side could claim decisive victory, and the struggle seemed destined to continue without end. Realizing that even these extraordinary weapons were not enough to break the deadlock, Zeus searched for one final advantage hidden within the forgotten depths of the world. There remained another group of ancient prisoners whose terrifying strength had once frightened even the Titans themselves, and releasing them carried enormous risk, but the fate of creation left no room for hesitation. The decisive turning point of the Titan War now depended upon whether these imprisoned giants would become allies or unleash a force beyond anyone's control. Zeus descended into the depths where the Centimanes had endured countless ages in chains, their 100 mighty arms and unmatched strength hidden from the world by those who had feared them most. Rather than treating them as monsters, he offered the freedom that had long been denied, and in return these ancient giants pledged their loyalty to the cause that promised to end the rule of tyranny forever. Could the very beings once imprisoned as a threat now become the force that would decide the fate of creation? With the Centimanes fighting beside the Olympians, the balance of the war shifted at last as enormous boulders rained upon the Titan armies without pause, breaking their formations and forcing even the mightiest warriors into retreat. Thunder roared through the heavens while the earth shook beneath relentless assaults. And amid the chaos, Zeus confronted Cronus in the battle that generations of prophecy had foretold long before either of them had taken the throne. The struggle was no longer between father and son alone, but between an age that refused to yield and another determined to be born. When the fighting finally came to an end, the Titans could no longer resist the united strength of their enemies, and were defeated after a conflict that had scarred the very fabric of the cosmos. Those who had stood beside Cronus were bound and cast into the abyss of Tartarus, where the Centimanes became their eternal guardians, ensuring that the old rulers would never again threaten the order of the world. Yet although the war had been won and the throne now belonged to Zeus, the greatest challenge of his reign was only beginning, for ruling the universe would prove far more difficult than conquering it. With the Titans defeated, Zeus did not seize power for himself alone, knowing that lasting order could not be built upon the ambitions of a single ruler. Together with his brothers, he divided the vast domains of creation by drawing lots, granting Poseidon command over the seas while Hades accepted dominion beneath the earth, leaving the heavens to Zeus as guardian of the skies. But would sharing authority truly prevent the mistakes that had destroyed every generation before them? Although each brother now ruled a separate realm, the earth remained a place where mortals and immortals would constantly cross paths, creating opportunities for both greatness and disaster. From the summit of Mount Olympus, the new generation of gods established their divine court, where alliances were formed, disputes were settled, and decisions made by a handful of immortals would echo through the lives of countless human beings. The universe had entered a new era, yet peace was proving to be far more fragile than victory. The reign of Zeus marked the beginning of stories that would define Greek mythology for centuries, introducing heroes, monsters, prophecies, and choices that tested both gods and mortals alike. Every triumph carried an unforeseen consequence. Every blessing concealed the possibility of punishment, and every act of defiance threatened to disturb the delicate balance the Olympians had fought so fiercely to create. The age of the Titans had ended, but the age of legend was only just beginning. Yet even as the Olympians secured their places upon the newly established order, Zeus understood that strength alone could never guarantee lasting stability. The wounds left by the Titan War still marked the world, and countless ancient powers remained beyond the reach of Olympus, waiting for the slightest sign of weakness before emerging once again. If the greatest battle had already been won, why did the king of the gods remain convinced that an even greater danger still lay ahead? His fears were not without reason, for deep within the earth rested Gaia, whose patience had once reshaped the universe itself, and whose anger could do so again. Watching her children imprisoned in Tartarus filled her with a fury unlike any she had known before, and from that burning resentment, she resolved to challenge the Olympians just as she had once turned against Uranus. The cycle of vengeance had not ended with the fall of Cronus. It was preparing to begin anew. From Gaia's wrath arose the giants, enormous beings whose overwhelming power rivaled that of the gods themselves, and whose only purpose was to overthrow the rulers of Olympus. Their arrival was not simply another rebellion, but a direct challenge to the authority Zeus had fought so hard to establish, forcing the king of the gods to prepare for yet another struggle that would test whether the new order deserved to survive. The victory over the Titans had secured a throne, but keeping it would demand a new kind of courage. The giants advanced with astonishing force, hurling mountains, tearing apart the landscape, and shaking the confidence of even the most powerful Olympians as the conflict spread across the world. Although Zeus commanded the heavens with unmatched authority, an ancient prophecy declared that the gods alone could never defeat these formidable enemies, making victory impossible without an ally they had long overlooked. How could fragile mortals influence a war that even the immortals struggled to survive? That answer appeared in the form of Heracles, whose unmatched courage and extraordinary strength made him the one hero capable of fulfilling the prophecy that bound gods and men together. Fighting beside Zeus and the Olympians, he faced the giants in a series of relentless battles where every triumph demanded sacrifice, determination, and unwavering resolve, gradually turning the tide of a war that had once seemed impossible to win. The alliance between heaven and humanity proved stronger than any force Gaia had unleashed. When the final giant fell, Olympus remained standing, but Zeus understood that every victory carried the promise of another challenge waiting beyond the horizon. The balance of the universe could never be preserved through power alone, because ambition, vengeance, and pride would continue to shape the choices of both gods and mortals for generations to come. And as new legends began to unfold across Greece, the greatest stories of mythology were only just preparing to reveal themselves. As the generations passed, the gods of Olympus became inseparable from the lives of those who walked the earth, rewarding devotion, punishing arrogance, and intervening whenever human ambition threatened to disturb the fragile balance they had created. Every city sought the favor of a different deity. Every voyage began with whispered prayers, and every victory or disaster was believed to reflect the unseen will of powers watching from above. But if the Olympians held such immense authority, why did so many of their own stories begin with conflict instead of harmony? The answer lay within the gods themselves, whose immortal nature never freed them from jealousy, pride, or rivalry, but instead magnified those emotions beyond anything mortals could imagine. Disputes over honor, affection, and power repeatedly drew both heroes and ordinary people into struggles they could neither understand nor escape, proving that even divine beings remained vulnerable to the same flaws that shaped the human heart. The greatest legends of Greece would not be born from perfect rulers, but from imperfect immortals whose choices echoed across generations. Through these unforgettable tales, the ancient Greeks sought to explain far more than the origins of their gods, revealing a vision of the world where every triumph demanded sacrifice, every act carried consequences, and every generation inherited the victories and mistakes of those who came before. Long after the temples had fallen silent and the kingdoms of antiquity had disappeared, those myths continued to survive because they spoke to questions that every civilization eventually asks about power, destiny, justice, and the enduring struggle between fear and hope. Even today, these ancient stories continue to captivate millions of people, not because they offer simple answers, but because they reveal how fear, ambition, loyalty, and sacrifice have shaped every generation throughout history. The names of Zeus, Athena, Poseidon, Hades, and countless others have endured for thousands of years because their legends speak to struggles that remain familiar no matter how much the world changes. Could that be the true reason Greek mythology has survived while so many other traditions have slowly faded into history? Behind every battle, every prophecy, and every divine punishment lies a deeper reminder that power is never permanent and that every ruler, regardless of how invincible they appear, must eventually confront the consequences of their own choices. From the first moment chaos gave way to creation until the Olympians established their rule over the cosmos, the myths repeatedly return to the same timeless lesson. Those who govern through fear ultimately create the very forces that will challenge them. It is a cycle that echoes through mythology, through history, and perhaps even through our own lives. And although the temples of ancient Greece now stand as weathered ruins beneath open skies, the stories born among those stones continue to inspire books, films, art, and discoveries across the world. Each generation revisits these legends, uncovering new meanings hidden within tales that have refused to disappear despite the passing of millennia, ensuring that the voices of the ancient storytellers still reach us today. Perhaps that is the greatest achievement of Greek mythology, not that it tells us how the gods once ruled the world, but that it continues to remind us why humanity has never stopped searching for meaning among the stars. As Greek civilization expanded across the Mediterranean, its myths traveled with merchants, soldiers, poets, and explorers, crossing seas and reaching lands far beyond the borders where they had first been told. Every generation reshaped these stories without erasing their essence, allowing ancient legends to remain alive while adapting to new audiences who continued to find meaning within them. How could tales born thousands of years ago still speak so clearly to people living in a completely different world? The answer may lie in the questions these myths never stop asking rather than in the miracles they describe, because beneath every monster, every prophecy, and every battle stands a reflection of human nature itself. Heroes confront impossible choices. Rulers discover that authority always carries responsibility. And even the gods learn that pride and anger often create consequences no amount of power can undo. It is this timeless understanding of ambition, fear, love, sacrifice, and destiny that has allowed Greek mythology to outlive the civilizations that first gave it life. From the silent emptiness that existed before creation to the reign of Olympus and the countless legends that followed, these stories form one immense narrative about the struggle to bring order from chaos and wisdom from conflict. Their characters may belong to a distant age, yet the emotions that shape their decisions remain strikingly familiar, inviting each new listener to see a part of themselves within the myths. And perhaps that is why, after more than 3,000 years, the voices of the ancient Greeks still whisper across history, reminding us that the greatest legends are never truly left behind. They simply wait for the next generation willing to hear them. The influence of these myths did not end with the ancient world, nor were they confined to the temples where they were first recited by priests and poets. As kingdoms rose and disappeared, philosophers debated their meaning, artists transformed them into masterpieces, and scholars preserved them through countless generations, ensuring that the stories of the Olympians would never vanish entirely. But were these tales meant to be accepted as literal history, or did they carry something even more enduring beneath their dramatic events? For the people who first told them, mythology was far more than entertainment, serving as a way to understand the forces they could neither predict nor control. Thunder became the voice of Zeus. The restless sea reflected Poseidon's temperament. The changing seasons revealed the sorrow of Demeter, and every unexplained event seemed connected to invisible powers whose decisions shaped both nature and human destiny. Through these stories, the ancient Greeks found order in a world that often appeared unpredictable, transforming mystery into meaning without ever losing their sense of wonder. That is why Greek mythology continues to stand as one of humanity's greatest storytelling traditions, not simply because it introduced unforgettable gods and legendary heroes, but because it captured timeless questions that remain just as compelling today as they were thousands of years ago. Every generation discovers something different within these ancient narratives, whether it is a lesson about leadership, a warning against arrogance, or the courage to confront the unknown despite overwhelming uncertainty. And as long as those questions continue to inspire curiosity, the legends of Olympus will remain alive, inviting each new listener to step once more into the extraordinary world where gods and mortals shaped the destiny of the cosmos. The legacy of Greek mythology extends far beyond the pages of ancient literature, continuing to shape the way modern cultures imagine heroism, justice, sacrifice, and the struggle between fate and free will. From towering temples reduced to weathered ruins to stories retold in books, films, and countless works of art, the Olympians have never truly disappeared, because each generation finds new meaning within their timeless adventures. But what has allowed these legends to endure while so many other ancient traditions have gradually faded from memory? Perhaps the answer lies in the remarkable way these myths combine the extraordinary with the deeply human, presenting gods of unimaginable power who nevertheless wrestle with the same emotions that define every life. Their victories are never effortless. Their mistakes often carry devastating consequences, and their greatest challenges reveal that wisdom is earned not through perfection, but through experience, loss, and perseverance. It is this emotional truth, hidden beneath tales of monsters, prophecies, and divine wars, that continues to resonate with audiences across thousands of years. As long as people continue asking where we came from, why power corrupts, whether destiny can be changed, or what it truly means to face the unknown with courage, the stories of Greek mythology will never lose their voice. They remain more than relics of a vanished civilization. They are a living reminder that humanity has always searched for meaning through storytelling, transforming fear into hope and uncertainty into legend. And perhaps that is the greatest gift the ancient Greeks left behind. Not simply a pantheon of unforgettable gods, but a collection of stories that still invites every new generation to wonder, question, and imagine the impossible. The world imagined by the ancient Greeks may belong to a distant past, yet its stories continue to breathe because they were never meant to remain trapped in a single place or a single era. They crossed empires, survived the fall of kingdoms, and found new voices in every generation that chose to preserve them, proving that the strongest legends are not measured by the age in which they were created, but by their ability to remain meaningful long after their creators are gone. Could any civilization have imagined that tales first spoken beneath the Mediterranean sky would one day be known across nearly every corner of the world? Even now, the echoes of Olympus can be found almost everywhere, from the names of planets and constellations to the symbols used in literature, psychology, architecture, and modern storytelling. Writers continue to draw inspiration from the courage of heroes, the wisdom of goddesses, and the tragic flaws of kings, while filmmakers and artists repeatedly return to these myths because they still capture emotions that feel unmistakably real despite their supernatural settings. The faces may belong to immortals, but their hopes, fears, triumphs, and failures continue to mirror our own. Perhaps that is why these ancient myths have never truly reached an ending, because every person who listens to them becomes part of the journey that began when the first storytellers looked toward the heavens and wondered who might be watching from above. As long as curiosity survives, as long as people continue searching for meaning beyond the visible world, the legends of Greek mythology will endure, not as forgotten relics of antiquity, but as living stories that remind us that imagination has always been one of humanity's greatest powers. Although the ancient world that gave birth to these legends disappeared long ago, the questions preserved within its myths remain as compelling as ever. They continue to challenge us to consider what true leadership requires, how easily fear can corrupt even the strongest ruler, and whether destiny is something that shapes our lives or something we shape through our own choices. If those questions still feel familiar after thousands of years, perhaps the distance between our world and theirs is not as great as it first appears. The myths of Greece have survived because they were never simply stories about immortal beings living beyond human reach. They were reflections of hope, ambition, loss, courage, and the endless struggle to overcome uncertainty. Every generation has rediscovered these narratives through its own perspective, finding new meaning in battles between gods, impossible journeys undertaken by heroes, and decisions whose consequences echoed far beyond those who first made them. That remarkable ability to speak to different ages has transformed Greek mythology into one of humanity's most enduring cultural treasures. As our journey through the origins of the Olympians and the legends surrounding them comes to an end, one truth remains impossible to ignore. The greatest myths are not remembered because they answer every question, but because they inspire new ones with every retelling. They remind us that the search for wisdom never truly ends, that every age creates its own heroes and its own challenges, and that the desire to understand our place in the universe is as old as civilization itself. Perhaps that is the most extraordinary legacy the ancient Greeks left behind, a world of stories that continues to invite us, thousands of years later, to look beyond the horizon and wonder what mysteries are still waiting to be discovered. The stories of Greek mythology have never belonged solely to the past, because every generation that encounters them discovers something new hidden beneath their familiar names and legendary adventures. What once explained the origins of the heavens, the sea, and the underworld gradually became a timeless collection of narratives exploring justice, loyalty, temptation, sacrifice, and the consequences of every decision, reminding us that even the oldest myths continue to evolve through those who retell them. But if these ancient tales still inspire people after so many centuries, what does that reveal about the questions humanity continues to ask? Perhaps their greatest strength lies not in the gods themselves, but in the remarkable way they transform the struggles of ordinary life into stories of unforgettable scale, where every triumph demands courage and every mistake carries consequences that cannot easily be undone. Whether through the wisdom of Athena, the relentless determination of Heracles, the tragic fate of Perseus, or the long journey of Odysseus, the myths repeatedly show that true greatness is measured not only by victory, but by the choices made when every path carries risk. And it is within those choices that these legends continue to reflect something deeply human, regardless of how much the world changes around us. Our journey through Greek mythology may end here, but the world it created continues far beyond this story, waiting within countless legends that have fascinated listeners for more than 3 millennia. Every myth opens the door to another. Every hero leaves behind new questions, and every generation discovers fresh meaning in tales that refuse to disappear with the passing of time. Perhaps that is why the voices of Olympus still echo today, not because they promise all the answers, but because they continue inviting us to explore one of the greatest storytelling traditions ever created. The fascination with Greek mythology has endured because these stories were never confined to the ancient temples where they were first recited, but continued to evolve as each generation found new meaning within them. Long after the last oracle fell silent and the great sanctuaries became ruins, the legends of Olympus continued to influence philosophy, literature, science, and art, proving that truly powerful stories are measured not by the age in which they were created, but by their ability to remain relevant across countless generations. And perhaps that is the greatest triumph of these myths, not that they describe a forgotten world of gods, but that they still encourage us to ask the same timeless questions about power, destiny, courage, and the human spirit. Even now, when we look toward the night sky and recognize the names of constellations, planets, or celestial bodies inspired by the Olympians, we are witnessing the extraordinary legacy of a civilization that transformed imagination into something almost eternal. Every new adaptation, every modern retelling, and every curious reader keeps these ancient voices alive, allowing stories once shared around sacred fires to reach audiences separated by thousands of years from those who first heard them. Could any of the ancient poets have imagined that their tales would still inspire millions in a world beyond anything they could have dreamed? So, as our journey through the birth of the cosmos, the rise of the Titans, the triumph of Zeus, and the enduring reign of the Olympians comes to its conclusion, one truth remains unmistakably clear. Greek mythology is far more than a collection of ancient legends. It is a timeless reflection of humanity's endless search for meaning in a universe filled with mystery. Its heroes remind us that courage often grows from adversity. Its gods reveal the dangers of pride and unchecked ambition, and its stories continue to invite every generation to look beyond the ordinary and imagine what might lie just beyond the horizon. Perhaps that is why, after thousands of years, the gates of Olympus have never truly closed. They remain open to anyone willing to listen, to wonder, and to continue the story. The legends of Olympus have reached their conclusion, yet Greek mythology itself stretches far beyond the stories we have explored, forming an immense tapestry woven from countless heroes, forgotten kingdoms, sacred sanctuaries, and extraordinary journeys. Every tale connects to another through bloodlines, prophecies, ancient rivalries, and impossible choices, creating a world where no victory exists in isolation and no action escapes consequence. What other mysteries still remain hidden within this remarkable civilization, waiting to reveal the lives of those who stood between humanity and the gods? Beyond the rulers of Olympus came the age of legendary heroes whose names would become just as enduring as those of the immortals themselves. Men and women who challenged monsters, crossed unknown seas, founded kingdoms, and confronted destinies that seemed impossible to escape. Their stories transformed divine conflicts into deeply personal struggles, showing how ordinary mortals could alter the course of history through courage, intelligence, endurance, and sacrifice, even while living beneath the constant gaze of the gods. It was through these heroes that mythology became more than the story of divine power. It became the story of humanity itself. And that is where an entirely new chapter begins, one filled with epic voyages, impossible labors, tragic kings, fearless queens, and civilizations whose greatest achievements still echo across the ancient world. Every path leads to another legend. Every legend uncovers another mystery, and every mystery reveals how the Greeks understood honor, fate, and the fragile balance between mortal ambition and divine will. The age of the gods may have shaped the world, but the age of heroes was about to show what humanity could accomplish when faced with the impossible. As the great age of heroes unfolded, the gods no longer stood alone at the center of every legend, for the destiny of the mortal world had become inseparable from their own. Across Greece, extraordinary men and women rose from humble beginnings to confront impossible trials, proving that courage could rival divine favor and that determination sometimes achieved what raw strength never could. But what compelled ordinary mortals to challenge creatures, kings, and even the will of Olympus itself. Some sought glory that would outlive their own lifetimes, while others fought to protect their families, fulfill impossible prophecies, or redeem mistakes that seemed beyond forgiveness. Their journeys carried them through forgotten kingdoms, sacred temples, storm-tossed seas, and lands haunted by monsters whose names would become immortal alongside the heroes who dared to face them. Every victory demanded sacrifice, every triumph carried a hidden cost, and every legend left behind another question that inspired future generations to continue the story. It was through these remarkable lives that Greek mythology expanded into one of the richest storytelling traditions ever created, blending history, imagination, belief, and human emotion into narratives that have endured for thousands of years. Heroes such as Perseus, Jason, Atlanta, Bellerophon, and many others would each leave an unforgettable mark upon the ancient world, their adventures revealing that true greatness is never granted freely but earned through relentless perseverance in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. And among all those extraordinary figures, one hero would eventually stand above nearly every other, whose impossible labors would become the ultimate symbol of strength, endurance, and the unbreakable will to overcome the impossible. The name of that hero was Heracles, remembered by the Romans as Hercules, and from the moment he entered the world his life was marked by forces far beyond his control. Born with extraordinary strength yet burdened by the relentless hatred of Hera, he would face trials that no ordinary person could have survived, discovering that true greatness is forged not through effortless victories, but through suffering, endurance, and impossible choices. How could a man destined for glory become one of mythology's most tragic figures before earning his place among the immortals? His path would lead him through a series of challenges unlike anything the ancient world had ever imagined, each one pushing him beyond the limits of both body and spirit. Fearsome beasts, monstrous serpents, untamed wilderness, ruthless rulers, and tasks that appeared utterly impossible stood between Heracles and redemption. Yet every labor revealed another layer of his character, proving that courage is measured not by the absence of fear, but by the determination to continue despite it. With every victory, his legend grew, but so too did the burden he carried within himself. The 12 labors of Heracles would become far more than extraordinary feats of strength, transforming into one of the greatest journeys ever told about resilience, sacrifice, and the struggle to overcome one's own destiny. They inspired generations of storytellers, artists, and philosophers because each challenge reflected a deeper truth hidden beneath the adventure, reminding listeners that the greatest battles are often fought long before the first blow is ever struck. And as the first of those impossible labors approached, Heracles stood unknowingly at the threshold of a story that would define the meaning of heroism for thousands of years. Before Heracles could confront the monsters that would define his legend, he first had to face an enemy far more dangerous than any creature lurking beyond the edges of the known world. Through a cruel twist born from Hera's relentless vengeance, his own mind was consumed by madness, and when his senses finally returned, he found himself surrounded by the unimaginable consequences of actions he could scarcely believe were his own. How could the greatest hero of Greece ever hope to recover from a tragedy no victory could erase? Overwhelmed by grief and desperate to find a path toward redemption, Heracles sought guidance from the sacred oracle of Delphi, hoping the gods might reveal whether forgiveness was still possible. The answer he received was neither comforting nor simple, for he was commanded to place himself in the service of King Eurystheus and obey every order the ruler chose to impose, no matter how humiliating or impossible those commands appeared. What seemed like punishment would soon become the beginning of the most celebrated series of trials in all of Greek mythology. Determined to atone for his past, Heracles accepted his fate without resistance, fully aware that each challenge would demand more than extraordinary strength alone. The first task awaiting him would send him into a wilderness haunted by a beast whose hide could not be pierced by any weapon forged by human hands, a creature whose very name inspired fear throughout Greece. And with that single command, the long journey of the 12 labors finally began. The people of Nemea had long lived beneath the shadow of a terror that seemed impossible to defeat, for a monstrous lion roamed the surrounding hills, leaving abandoned villages, shattered hope, and countless lives in its wake. Hunters had pursued the beast before, yet every spear, arrow, and blade failed against its impenetrable hide, convincing many that no mortal could ever bring the nightmare to an end. But how do you fight an enemy that no weapon can wound? Without hesitation, Heracles set out toward the rugged wilderness where the creature was said to dwell, following broken tracks and the silence left behind by those who had never returned. When the lion finally emerged from its rocky refuge, its enormous frame and fearless gaze revealed a predator that had never known defeat. Yet Heracles understood that victory would demand more than brute force alone. If steel could not pierce the beast, then only his own strength would decide the outcome of the battle. Sealing the exits of the creature's den to prevent its escape, Heracles abandoned his weapons and confronted the lion with nothing but his bare hands, locking himself in a desperate struggle where neither opponent could retreat. After an exhausting contest of endurance and raw power, he finally overpowered the beast and ended its reign of terror, later wearing its impenetrable hide as a symbol of the trial he had survived. The first labor had been completed, but 11 even greater challenges still stood between Heracles and the redemption he sought. Heracles returned to King Eurystheus carrying the skin of the Nemean lion upon his shoulders, offering undeniable proof that the impossible task had been accomplished. Rather than honoring the achievement, the frightened king reportedly refused to face the hero directly, realizing that the man he hoped would perish possessed a strength unlike anything the mortal world had ever witnessed. Yet instead of granting him peace, Eurystheus prepared another trial that promised to be even more dangerous than the first. This time, Heracles was ordered to destroy the terrifying Lernaean Hydra, a monstrous serpent that lurked within the marshes of Lerna and spread fear throughout the surrounding lands. The creature's greatest horror did not lie in its immense size alone, but in the dreadful gift that made it nearly impossible to kill, for whenever one of its many heads was severed, two more immediately emerged to take its place. How could any warrior defeat an enemy that became stronger every time it was wounded? Recognizing that overwhelming force alone would never bring victory, Heracles soon discovered that this battle would demand both determination and ingenuity if he hoped to survive. As the Hydra's countless heads struck from every direction and the poisonous air surrounding the beast threatened anyone who approached, the second labor began to test not only the hero's unmatched strength, but also his ability to overcome an enemy that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. As Heracles confronted the Hydra, every powerful blow seemed only to deepen the danger, for each severed head was instantly replaced by two more, turning every success into a new obstacle. The creature's venomous breath filled the marsh with deadly fumes, while its twisting neck struck without pause, forcing the hero into a relentless struggle that threatened to exhaust even his extraordinary strength. Was this the challenge that would finally prove impossible, even for the greatest warrior in Greece? Realizing that brute force alone could never overcome such an enemy, Heracles changed his approach and called upon the help of his loyal nephew, Iolaus, who stood ready beside him. As each head fell beneath the hero's weapon, Iolaus immediately sealed the wound with burning fire, preventing new heads from growing and slowly stripping the monster of the terrifying advantage that had made it invincible for so long. Together, they transformed a hopeless battle into one that could finally be won through determination, cooperation, and careful strategy. When the Hydra's final immortal head remained, Heracles cut it away, buried it deep beneath an enormous stone, and ended the reign of one of Greece's most feared monsters. Before leaving the marsh, he dipped the tips of his arrows into the creature's deadly blood, knowing that its powerful venom would remain with him during the trials still to come, though he could not yet imagine the tragic role it would one day play in his own fate. The second labor was complete, but Eurystheus had no intention of allowing the hero's journey to end so easily. Eurystheus watched Heracles return once again with another impossible task completed, and instead of accepting defeat, he searched for a challenge that demanded patience rather than battle. His next command sent the hero deep into the wild forests of Arcadia to capture the sacred Ceryneian hind, a magnificent creature dedicated to Artemis whose astonishing speed had allowed it to escape every hunter who had ever pursued it. How could Heracles succeed when harming the animal would only bring the anger of one of Olympus' most revered goddesses? Knowing that violence would lead only to failure, Heracles followed the elusive hind across mountains, valleys, and hidden woodlands, refusing to abandon the pursuit despite the passing seasons. The chase continued for many months, testing not his strength but his endurance, discipline, and restraint, until at last he found the perfect moment to capture the sacred animal without inflicting serious harm. Even then, the trial was not truly over, for Artemis herself appeared to demand an explanation for what had been done. With humility rather than defiance, Heracles revealed that he acted under divine command and had no desire to dishonor the goddess or her sacred creature. Satisfied that the hero sought obedience rather than disrespect, Artemis allowed him to complete the labor before the hind was safely returned to her protection, proving that wisdom and respect could achieve what force alone never could. 3 labors had now been completed, yet Eurystheus was already preparing another challenge that would drive Heracles into the heart of one of Greece's most terrifying wildernesses. The 4th labor led Heracles toward the untamed heights of Mount Erymanthus, where a colossal wild boar roamed the snow-covered slopes, devastating fields and terrifying every settlement in its path. Unlike the monsters he had already defeated, this beast did not possess divine powers or an impenetrable body, but its immense size, unstoppable fury, and intimate knowledge of the rugged terrain had allowed it to evade every attempt at capture. Could the hero succeed where every hunter before him had failed without taking the creature's life? Rather than charging recklessly into battle, Heracles patiently drove the boar higher into the mountains, forcing it through deep drifts of snow that steadily drained its strength while preserving his own. As the exhausted animal struggled to break free from the frozen landscape, the hero seized the opportunity to overpower it, binding the enormous beast before carrying it alive across Greece exactly as Eurystheus had commanded. The sight of the captured boar was so astonishing that the king is said to have hidden himself in terror rather than face the man who had once again returned victorious. With the 4th labor completed, Eurystheus realized that neither savage beasts nor impossible hunts had been enough to stop the son of Zeus. Determined to break Heracles through exhaustion instead of danger alone, he abandoned the path of heroic combat and assigned a task that appeared almost impossible through its sheer scale rather than its violence. The next challenge would require the hero to accomplish in a single day what countless workers could not achieve in years, proving that true greatness sometimes depends more upon ingenuity than strength alone. The 5th labor seemed almost insulting when compared with the terrifying beasts Heracles had already overcome, for Eurystheus ordered him to clean the enormous stables of King Augeas, where countless cattle had been kept for years without the filth ever being removed. Mountains of waste covered the ground. The air had become nearly unbearable, and the task appeared so vast that no ordinary workforce could have completed it in weeks, let alone within a single day. How could a challenge without monsters or weapons become one of the most impossible trials the hero had yet faced? Rather than exhausting himself through endless manual labor, Heracles studied the land surrounding the stables and recognized an opportunity hidden in the landscape itself. He redirected the powerful currents of 2 nearby rivers, breaking through the walls that enclosed the vast pens and allowing the rushing waters to sweep away years of accumulated filth in a matter of hours, accomplishing what had once seemed beyond imagination. Strength had opened many doors before, but this victory belonged to intelligence, observation, and the willingness to solve a problem in an entirely unexpected way. Although the task had been completed exactly as commanded, Eurystheus refused to count the labor, claiming that Heracles had relied upon the rivers instead of his own effort and had also expected a reward from King Augeas for completing the work. The decision revealed that the king's true purpose had never been fairness, but the endless search for another impossible challenge that might finally defeat the hero through persistence, if not through danger. Yet Heracles accepted the injustice without abandoning his quest, unaware that the trials ahead would soon return him to confront creatures whose names had already become symbols of terror throughout Greece. For his 6th labor, Eurystheus sent Heracles to the shores of Lake Stymphalus, where vast flocks of monstrous birds had transformed the surrounding region into a place of fear and desolation. Their razor-sharp bronze beaks and metallic feathers could cut through flesh like blades, while anyone attempting to approach the marshes quickly became the target of relentless attacks from above. How could even the strongest hero defeat an enemy that ruled both the sky and the ground? The dense wetlands offered almost no opportunity for direct combat, making every step through the swamp more dangerous than the last as the birds remained hidden beyond reach. At that crucial moment, Athena provided Heracles with a pair of bronze castanets crafted by Hephaestus, whose thunderous sound echoed across the marsh and startled the entire flock into taking flight, exposing them against the open sky. As the creatures scattered in panic, the hero seized his bow and brought down many of the deadly birds, while the survivors abandoned the region forever, leaving the people of Stymphalus free from the terror that had haunted them for years. With yet another impossible task completed, Heracles proved once again that victory depended as much upon adaptability as it did upon unmatched strength. Every labor demanded a different solution, forcing the hero to rely not only on his power, but also on patience, wisdom, and the guidance offered by the gods whenever brute force alone could not prevail. Yet Eurystheus still refused to believe the son of Zeus could not be broken, and the next command would send Heracles farther from Greece than ever before, into lands where an entirely new challenge awaited him. The seventh labor carried Heracles far beyond the familiar lands of Greece to the island of Crete, where an enormous bull roamed unchecked across the countryside, destroying fields, crushing villages, and spreading fear wherever it appeared. The creature's immense strength and unpredictable fury had made it impossible to control, and even the island's ruler had failed to bring it under his command despite countless attempts. Could the hero subdue such a beast without ending its life, as Eurystheus had specifically ordered? Rather than meeting the bull with reckless aggression, Heracles carefully studied its movements, waiting until the perfect moment to confront it on open ground where neither cliffs nor forests could aid its escape. After a fierce struggle that tested every ounce of his endurance, he seized the raging animal by its powerful horns, gradually forcing it into submission before carrying it across the sea to Greece as undeniable proof that the impossible command had been fulfilled. Once again, what had seemed beyond human ability became another victory earned through patience, resilience, and extraordinary strength. Eurystheus accepted the captured bull, yet even this astonishing achievement failed to satisfy his determination to break the son of Zeus through endless trials. The creature was eventually released, continuing its wandering path through Greece and leaving behind new dangers that later heroes would one day confront, while Heracles received another command without pause or reward. Ahead waited a challenge unlike any before it, one that demanded not the capture of a single beast, but the mastery of a herd whose supernatural power had become legendary throughout the ancient world. The eighth labor led Heracles into the distant land of Thrace, where the fearsome mares of King Diomedes had become infamous throughout the region for their savage nature. These were no ordinary horses, for they had been trained to feed on human flesh, and every traveler who crossed their path risked becoming prey to creatures whose terrifying reputation had spread far beyond their master's kingdom. How could anyone hope to capture animals driven by such unnatural hunger without falling victim to them first? Upon reaching the kingdom, Heracles confronted Diomedes and his warriors in a fierce struggle that erupted as the king sought to protect the monstrous herd at all costs. After overcoming the resistance, the hero seized control of the mares, and in the aftermath of the battle the savage ruler met the very fate he had long inflicted upon others, bringing an end to the cruelty that had sustained the beast's terrible behavior. Freed from the influence of their brutal master, the horses gradually became calm enough for Heracles to lead them safely back across Greece. When the mares were finally presented before Eurystheus, another seemingly impossible command had been fulfilled, yet the king remained unwilling to acknowledge the hero's growing legend. Every completed labor only strengthened Heracles' reputation among the people, while deepening Eurystheus' frustration, forcing him to search for challenges hidden ever farther beyond the edges of the known world. The next task would demand a journey into a distant realm ruled by a queen whose treasured possession was guarded not only by warriors, but by the favor of the gods themselves. The ninth labor carried Heracles farther than any of his previous journeys, leading him to the distant lands ruled by Hippolyta, the powerful queen of the Amazons. Among all her possessions, one stood above the rest, a magnificent war belt bestowed upon her by Ares himself, symbolizing both her authority and the unmatched courage of the legendary warriors who followed her. But would this mission require another brutal battle, or could it be accomplished without bloodshed? When Heracles finally stood before Hippolyta, the meeting unfolded in a way no one had expected, for the queen listened to his request with respect and, according to many ancient traditions, was prepared to hand over the sacred belt willingly. Yet the calm did not last, as Hera, still consumed by her hatred of the son of Zeus, disguised herself among the Amazons and spread the rumor that their queen was about to be abducted by strangers. Within moments, trust gave way to chaos, and what had begun as a peaceful negotiation erupted into a fierce conflict neither side had intended. Surrounded by warriors who believed they were defending their queen, Heracles was forced into a desperate struggle where every decision carried devastating consequences. When the fighting finally ended, he claimed Hippolyta's belt and departed the Amazon kingdom, completing yet another labor, though the victory came at a far greater cost than he had hoped. With only 3 challenges remaining, Eurystheus prepared a task that would send the hero to the very edge of the known world, toward a land watched over by one of the most extraordinary creatures in all of Greek mythology. The 10th labor demanded a journey unlike any Heracles had undertaken before, carrying him beyond the familiar shores of Greece to the distant island of Erythea, where the magnificent cattle of the giant Geryon grazed beneath constant watch. These remarkable red cattle were prized above all others, but no traveler could hope to reach them without first facing guardians whose strength and vigilance had become legendary throughout the ancient world. What kind of ruler could possess a herd protected by monsters that even seasoned warriors feared to approach? After an arduous journey across unfamiliar lands, Heracles finally reached the remote island and found his path blocked first by the monstrous two-headed watchdog Orthrus, whose fierce attack ended only when the hero struck with overwhelming force. Moments later, the giant herdsman Eurytion rushed forward to defend the cattle, but he too fell before the son of Zeus, clearing the way for the inevitable confrontation with Geryon himself, a towering warrior whose extraordinary form reflected the terrifying reputation that surrounded his name. The final guardian had entered the battlefield, and this encounter would demand every ounce of Heracles' strength and resolve. The battle between Heracles and Geryon echoed across the island as the giant pressed forward with relentless determination, confident that no mortal could overcome such overwhelming power. Yet guided by unwavering courage and aided by the divine weapons that had carried him through so many impossible trials, Heracles finally brought the mighty guardian down and claimed the sacred cattle that had long seemed beyond anyone's reach. 10 labors were now behind him, but Eurystheus still refused to grant redemption, preparing 2 final challenges that would push the hero beyond the limits of the mortal world itself.